Hey everyone, welcome back to our entitled parents. Picture this. You work two jobs to purchase your very first home, only for your parents to turn around and insist you swap it with your entitled sister who has never held down a job a single day in her life. They labeled me selfish for saying no, but what they didn't realize was that I was sitting on a massive pile of evidence proving their whole way of life was built on lies. Let's get right into the Reddit stories. The first one is called, Am I the a-hole for refusing to swap houses with my sister and exposing my parents' financial crimes? So, I'm a 32-year-old male, and I've been the black sheep of my family for as far back as I can remember. My younger sister, 29, female, has always been the golden child, and I mean that in the most extreme way imaginable. Growing up, she received everything she ever wanted while I got the bare minimum. We're talking about her getting a brand new Kite 16 while I had to scrape together money from part-time work to afford a beat-up Honda Civic that could barely stay on the road. Her college was completely funded by my parents, while they told me they couldn't spare a single dollar toward mine. She got vacations, designer clothing, and her own bedroom, while I slept in what was essentially a converted closet. I moved out at 18 and never looked back. I worked my way through community college, transferred to a state university, and eventually earned a degree in accounting. It was grueling. I was juggling two jobs most of the time, eating ramen more nights than I cared to count, and spending my entire 20s grinding away while my sister was living her best life on my parents' tab. Here's where it gets interesting. A few years back, I landed a solid position at a small firm. I put in the work, earned two promotions, and now I make what I describe as comfortable money. Nothing extravagant, but enough to live well. I managed to build up a solid down payment and purchased a nice house in a decent neighborhood about 18 months ago. Nothing too elaborate, just a two-bedroom starter home, but it's mine. I earned every cent of it, and I carry real pride in that. My sister, on the other hand, has bounced from one job to the next throughout her entire adult life, never holding any position for longer than a year because she always has some excuse about toxic bosses or jealous coworkers. My parents have been bankrolling her lifestyle the whole time, covering her rent, her car payments, her credit cards, everything. She's been living in a gorgeous two-story house that my parents co-signed for and have been footing the payments on. About 2 months ago, my mom called asking me to come over for a family dinner. I was reluctant since we aren't particularly close, but something in her tone suggested something serious was going on. So I showed up. What followed was the most surreal exchange of my entire life. My parents sat me down and explained that they were in serious financial trouble. Apparently, my dad had been running some kind of side operation that wasn't exactly above board. I won't go into the specifics since the legal proceedings are still ongoing, but let's just say the IRS and several other agencies have taken a keen interest in their finances. They've racked up enormous debt, their assets are under scrutiny, and they're facing potential criminal charges. I was still processing all of that when my mom dropped the real bombshell. She said they needed my help, and by help, she didn't mean emotional support or guidance. She meant they wanted me to swap houses with my sister. I thought I'd misheard her. I asked her to say it again. She did. They wanted me to sign over my house to my sister so she could have a fresh start in a property not entangled in their financial disaster. In return, I would take over my sister's house, along with the outstanding mortgage and whatever legal complications came attached to it. My mom actually had the nerve to say that since my sister's house was larger and worth more on paper, I was really coming out ahead. I asked if she was being serious. She was. My dad stepped in and launched into a lecture about how family looks after family and how I owed them for raising me. He actually said that since I was doing well financially, it was only fair I share that success with my sister, who was struggling. He went on about how I was always the difficult child, never appreciative, always making things complicated, and that this was my opportunity to finally step up and be a true part of the family. My sister sat there the entire time, wearing a smug expression, occasionally chiming in about how stressed she was and how she couldn't deal with the uncertainty of potentially losing her home. She even made a comment about how my smaller house would be just right for her to downsize into while she sorted out her next move. I wish I could say I handled it with grace, but I didn't. I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine, disbelieving laugh. I asked them if they were seriously expecting me to hand over the house I worked for, the house I earned without a single cent of their support, so my sister could carry on living a lifestyle she never deserved. I reminded them that they never helped me with anything, that I put myself through school while they were buying my sister new cars and funding her spring break trips. My mom burst into tears. My dad turned red and started shouting about how I was being selfish and ungrateful. My sister called me a horrible person and said she always knew I was just jealous of her. It was complete chaos. And then I walked out. I told them absolutely not. My house was mine, and I had no intention of sacrificing what I'd built to clean up their mess. My dad yelled after me that I'd regret this, that I was cutting myself off from the family, and that when they were gone, I'd have nothing. Since then, I've been flooded with messages from extended family members who've been fed some twisted version of what happened. And hey guys, just a quick aside here. If you were in Opie's position, would you have traded houses with your entitled family? Drop a comment and let me know what you would have done. Because honestly, these people seem outrageously entitled, and there's absolutely no reason OP should have to accommodate them. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give the video a like if you're enjoying the content. So apparently my parents told everyone that I'm wealthy and refusing to help my poor, struggling sister who's on the verge of becoming homeless. I've had aunts and uncles calling me selfish. Cousins I haven't spoken to in years texting me that family should come first. And my grandmother apparently said she's ashamed of me. The thing is, I've been debating whether to do something that could blow everything up even further. Remember how I mentioned I'm an accountant? Well, during that dinner, my dad let slip some details about his side operation that made me deeply uneasy. Details suggesting what he was doing wasn't just shady, but outright illegal. We're talking potential fraud, tax evasion, and possibly some money laundering through a small LLC he'd set up. I have access to some documentation because years ago, before our relationship completely fell apart, my dad asked me to help him with bookkeeping for what he called a small side project. I did it as a favor and didn't think much of it at the time, but I kept copies of everything because that's just how I operate. Looking back at those records now, with everything I know, there's serious red flags I didn't catch then, but absolutely recognize now. So I've been going back and forth on whether to report what I know to the authorities. Part of me thinks I should stay out of it and let whatever investigation is already underway run its course. But another part of me is furious that these are the people who neglected me my entire childhood, who made me feel worthless, who are now demanding I surrender everything I've built to bail out their golden child, all while apparently running an illegal operation on the side. There's also the matter of my sister's house. If I'm reading the situation correctly, my parents have been using proceeds from their questionable activities to make payments on that mortgage, which means my sister might not be quite the innocent victim she's portraying herself as. She's not naive. There's no way she didn't notice that her parents were making $3,500 mortgage payments every month while claiming to be middle-class retirees. So here's where things stand. I've refused to trade houses, obviously. I've refused to bail them out financially. And I'm sitting on information that could significantly accelerate their legal troubles. I'm also contemplating going completely no contact with everyone, including the extended family members who've been harassing me. My wife, we got married last year, has been incredibly supportive throughout all of this. She thinks I should just walk away and let things play out on their own. She's worried that if I report anything, I could somehow get pulled into it, even though I didn't knowingly take part in anything illegal. She's also worried about the toll this whole situation is taking on me. But there's a small, petty corner of me that wants to see them face real consequences, not just for what they're doing now, but for years of neglect, favoritism, and making me feel like I was worth less than nothing compared to my sister. I know that's not a healthy reason, but I'm being straight with you here. So, Reddit. Am I the a-hole for refusing to trade houses with my sister? And would I be the a-hole if I reported what I know about my parents' potentially illegal business dealings? Let me know in the comments whether you think Opie would be in the wrong for doing any of that. Personally, I'd say if he reported these entitled family members, he'd be a legend, because they clearly treated him terribly for years, and they absolutely don't deserve a free house or Opie's financial support. But that might just be me. Drop your thoughts in the comments. A commenter wrote, NTA, and I say this as someone who practices law, OP, don't sign anything. Don't trade houses. The fact that your parents' assets are under scrutiny means there's almost certainly an active investigation already. If you take on your sister's house, you could be inheriting a massive legal nightmare, including potential asset seizure. That house may not even be legally theirs to transfer. Your sister's mortgage could be classified as proceeds from criminal activity. If the payments came from dirty money, talk to your own attorney before doing anything else. Also, keep those documents safe, but consult with a lawyer before deciding whether to report. You don't want to accidentally implicate yourself or compromise evidence. Comment number 2. Everyone sucks here. I know I'm going to get downvoted into oblivion for this, but hear me out. Your parents and sister are obviously massive a-holes for the demand and years of favoritism. That's beyond dispute. But the fact that you're considering reporting them out of revenge rather than genuine concern about illegal activity is troubling. You're not asking, should I do the right thing? You're asking, should I destroy them because I'm angry? That's not justice. That's vengeance. And honestly, guys, is vengeance really so wrong in this situation? If your parents treated you terribly for literally decades, doing what Opie is considering seems pretty justified to me. I'm not saying don't report. I'm saying examine your motivations and make sure you can live with whatever choice you make. Comment number 3. YTA. I feel like I'm losing my mind reading these comments. Unpopular opinion. You sound low-key obsessed with your sister. You got a whole life, a house, everything going for you, but you're still keeping score over who got which vacations 15 years ago. You're 32, man. Go to therapy and move on. And let's talk about the records. You kept copies just in case? That's paranoid behavior. You were planning to use it against them from day one. You've been holding on to that evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to blow up their lives. That's not being a responsible citizen. That's being vindictive. You don't care about the law. You just want to win against your little sister. And now we have an update to the story, which goes like this. It's been about 6 months since my original post, and so much has unfolded that I barely know where to begin. Dozens of people have messaged me asking for updates. And now that the legal situation has settled enough for me to speak about it, here's what went down. First, I want to thank everyone who commented on my original post. The overwhelming consensus was that I was NTA for refusing to trade houses, and several people with legal backgrounds strongly encouraged me to consult an attorney before making any decisions about reporting anyone. I took that advice seriously, and it probably saved both my career and my freedom. The week after my original post, I scheduled a consultation with a criminal defense attorney who specializes in white-collar crime. I showed him the documentation I had from my dad's side business and walked him through my situation. He was quiet for a long time after reviewing everything, which made me anxious. He told me that based on what he was seeing, had I continued helping my father with bookkeeping and hadn't maintained meticulous records proving I'd stopped, I could have been considered a co-conspirator. The only thing protecting me was the fact that I had copies showing exactly what I did when I stopped, and that my involvement was limited to legitimate bookkeeping tasks before things apparently went sideways. He also noted that given my profession as a CPA, I had potential ethical obligations to consider. If I was aware of ongoing fraud and stayed silent, it could put my license at risk down the road if it ever came out that I had knowledge and chose not to act. He walked me carefully through my options. Shortly after that consultation, I received a letter from my parents. Not a heartfelt apology or any attempt at reconciliation. No, this was a formal demand letter that they'd apparently had some cut-rate attorney draft. The letter stated that since I had performed accounting work for my father's business, I was professionally obligated to maintain confidentiality about anything I had observed during that engagement. It also demanded I surrender any copies of documentation I'd retained and threatened to report me to the State Board of Accountancy for ethics violations if I disclosed anything. I read that letter 3 times because I genuinely couldn't believe what I was looking at. My parents were actually threatening my career to keep me quiet about their crimes. My attorney was almost gleeful when I showed it to him. He explained that my father's interpretation of accountant-client privilege was completely wrong. There's no blanket protection for illegal activity. In fact, if a client is using an accountant's services to perpetuate fraud, the accountant has no obligation to protect the confidentiality of that fraud. More importantly, the letter was essentially proof that my parents knew what they were doing was illegal and were actively trying to obstruct any potential investigation. And here's where my parents made their fatal mistake. They had demanded I do something specific, maintain confidentiality, and threaten me with professional consequences if I didn't comply. So I decided to comply. My attorney helped me draft a response letter. In it, I stated that I would comply with all of my actual legal and ethical obligations as a CPA. I explicitly noted that while CPAs do carry confidentiality obligations, those obligations don't extend to concealing fraud, money laundering, or other criminal activity. I stated that I would cooperate fully with any legal authorities who might request information, as was my obligation under federal and state law. I also noted that any further attempts to intimidate me or interfere with potential legal proceedings could constitute obstruction of justice. I CC'd the IRS and the State Attorney General's office. Along with the letter, I included copies of all the bookkeeping records I had from my dad's side business, with a cover letter explaining the limited scope of my involvement and the timeline of my work. My parents apparently didn't see this coming. In their minds, I was still the same pushover kid they could bully into submission. They genuinely believed that threatening my career would bring me back in line. What they didn't understand was that their threat had actually given me the perfect justification to do what I had already been considering. I wasn't reporting them out of revenge anymore. I was reporting them because they had explicitly threatened me and I needed to protect myself legally. I later found out that my father's side operation was far larger than I had ever imagined. What I thought was a modest LLC doing some consulting work was actually a shell company that had been used to launder money for years. My father had been providing fake invoicing services to multiple other businesses, making their illegitimate income appear legitimate in exchange for a substantial cut. The total amount that had passed through his operation over the years was somewhere in the seven figures. I also found out the real reason they wanted me to trade houses. It wasn't just about giving my sister a fresh start. My sister's house had been purchased with dirty money. The mortgage payments had been made with dirty money too. By getting me to take over that property, they were essentially attempting to launder the asset through me. If I had agreed to the swap, I would have been accepting property potentially subject to seizure as proceeds of criminal activity, and I might have been directly implicated in the money laundering scheme itself. My parents were eventually arrested and charged with money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The case was pretty airtight. As it turned out, my documentation combined with what investigators already had gave prosecutors everything they needed. My father received a 5-year federal prison sentence. My mom received 2 years, and both of them are currently serving their time. My sister lost the house. She lost the car my parents had been making payments on. She lost access to the credit cards they'd been covering. Essentially, the entire financial support structure that had propped up her lifestyle throughout her entire adult life was stripped away overnight. And then she came to me. She begged me to let her stay with us, just temporarily, just until she got back on her feet. She said she had nowhere else to turn, that all her friends had abandoned her, that extended family wasn't returning her calls. My wife and I had discussed this possibility in advance because we knew it was likely coming and we had agreed on exactly how we would handle it. I told my sister that I was sorry she was in this situation, but that I couldn't help her. I reminded her of the dinner where she sat there smugly, fully expecting me to hand over my home. I reminded her of every moment growing up when she received everything while I received nothing. I reminded her of the threatening letter our parents sent, which she had apparently been aware of and supported. And I told her that for my entire life, I had been cast as the difficult one, the ungrateful one, the one who didn't appreciate family, and that I had been treated as an afterthought, as someone whose only value was in what I could provide for others. I told her that I had built my life from absolutely nothing while she had everything handed to her. And now that the handouts had dried up, she expected me to become the news source. I was not going to do that. She called me heartless. She said I was destroying what remained of the family. She said our parents were in prison because of me, I corrected her. I told her our parents were in prison because they had committed crimes. They were in prison because they had chosen to break the law for years and assumed they'd never be held accountable. They were in prison because instead of accepting the consequences of their own actions, they had tried to threaten and intimidate their own son into helping cover it all up. The only thing I did was protect myself from their threats, exactly as they had demanded I do. She left after that, and I haven't heard from her since. The next story is a great petty revenge tale titled, I Stopped Coworkers from Leaving Their Trash on My Desk. Many years ago, I had a corner desk positioned near the door. Coworkers would routinely set their drinks down on my desk on their way to the restroom and pick them up on the way back. After asking them to stop, I placed an extra wastebasket at the end of my desk and started tossing their drinks into it. They were often genuinely baffled to find their drink gone when they returned. I just apologized and explained that I hadn't known whose trash had been left on my desk, but that I needed the space to work. They were also in the habit of bumping into my chair while cutting through my workspace, sometimes multiple times a day, and it was always the same small group of people. It got so bad that if I roll my chair back just 6 inches, I'd accidentally collide with them. So that's exactly what I started doing. Whenever I needed to grab a file from the side drawer, I'd roll back and turn sideways to reach it. And I decided I needed a file pretty much every single time someone was cutting through my area. It took a few incidents, but the worst offender eventually stopped after a handful of encounters between their ankles and my chair legs. I would always apologize profusely, ask if they were okay, offer to help them back to their desk, suggest writing up an accident report. The whole routine. Nobody was ever seriously hurt, but I'm sure there were a few bruises. I'm not exactly proud of it, but I'd do it all over again if I were back at that desk. The next one is a fantastic malicious compliance story titled, Hope You Enjoyed Your Drive. I work for a property management company, and part of my job involves time-sensitive sign-offs in the NYC department of Buildings Portal. We normally have plenty of time to get things signed off. Usually it's just a matter of logging in and clicking a box or two, but missing a sign-off can result in significant fines. Dan, an older manager who'd been brought out of retirement, handled compliance, and he was not tech-savvy. After he missed a sign-off and the company was fined, we met with our boss to work out how to prevent it from happening again. I suggested a single shared company login with alerts routed to our administrative assistant, who would then track us down to get things signed. But Dan refused, citing liability concerns and unauthorized sign-offs. The real issue, though, was that he always waited until the last minute and didn't want anyone seeing the reminder emails pile up in his inbox. The owner kept the existing system in place, but warned Dan that the next mistake would cost him his bonus. Shortly after, staff let me know that Dan had been trying to dig up dirt on me. I sent a company-wide email calling that out directly and made it clear I would no longer assist him with sign-offs. Months later, while Dan was on vacation, an engineer called me asking whether Dan was still with the company. He'd been trying to reach him for over 2 weeks with no response, and a sign-off was due the very next day. I told the engineer Dan was on vacation, but said I'd text him. The following morning, Dan called me in a panic asking if I could take care of it. I told him I wouldn't be in the office and reminded him that given his concerns about security, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to log in on his behalf. I told him he could handle it from his phone and hung up. Well, Dan was not able to manage that. Instead, he drove 6 hours round trip during his vacation just to sit at his desk and check a single box. The next story is another petty revenge tale titled Hid Tuna Fish in Curtain Rod. This happened years ago, but I'm still proud of it. A girl in trade school would casually call me a slur because she thought it was funny. I never said anything about it, but I ended up at a house party at her place. I found a can of tuna, slipped into a couple of unoccupied rooms, the spare room, the laundry room, pulled apart the curtain rods, and stuffed the canned tuna inside them. A masterpiece of a plan, if I do say so myself. That stuff reeks. And when you notice an odd smell in your home, you check everywhere, but you never think to look inside the curtain rods. For weeks after that party, I'd overhear her complaining to her friends about this smell that she and her boyfriend simply could not locate. I got a tremendous amount of satisfaction out of that. And yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.